All right, I don't know what time it is on your clock, but I know what I'm getting ready for. It is time for the Professional CISO Podcast with David Malicoat.
Welcome, one and all, to the Professional CISO Podcast. I'm your host, David Malicoat. This show is an exploration of the topics necessary to professionalize the role of the CISO. All right, gang, a little bit different today. So what we're doing, this is our first innovation series. And so let's define the innovation series. This is a deep dive into the technologies, new things that are out there, developments in cybersecurity, and we're going to do it from a buyer's perspective, right? So this is where I put my CISO hat on and I say, hey, let's talk to some products out there, some services, whatever it looks like, and maybe a combination thereof. But in the end, we're talking to these folks and we're going to define the problem space. We're going to find out exactly how they're solving that problem. We're going to look and we're going to kind of poke around the edges and to see what that implementation looks like around people, process, and technology. So I'm very excited for this. I think it's gonna be a really interesting thing for a lot of folks out there to hear about these new innovations that are coming around in cybersecurity and be able to keep a pulse on how things are developing. So today, without further ado, our innovation guest is Armis, and we'll be covering the Armis Centrix product. And so representing Armis today is Michael Freeman, their head of threat intelligence. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So, Michael, first I want to start with, can you give me a little bit of background on you, right? So, obviously, Armis brings you into the fold for a good reason, and obviously they put you out here to talk about your product specifically for a good reason. So, give the audience an idea. What's your background? Why should they be listening to you, quite honestly?
Yeah, my background is I spent a couple decades building offensive and defensive capabilities for U.S. intelligence agencies. I left that field and spent some time at a Fortune 100 company for 5 years, where I took a look at some of the problem spaces we were having and realized we could do much better. And long story short, I started a company and got acquired by Armis back in February.
Love it. Love it. And okay, so let's go immediately into the problem space, right? So most companies just don't start for no reason. Most companies just don't get acquired for no reason. So let's kind of go this macro to micro. And so why does Armis Centrix exist? Like, why was the company started? What's that macro problem that Armis is trying to solve?
It's a lot of problems we're trying to solve. The very first problem was, as a CISO, you don't know what assets you actually have. In fact, your security operations teams almost never will know all the assets you actually have in your environment. And you can't really defend if you don't know what you have. And that was the first problem statement we actually tackled to solve that problem.
Okay. And so as we've progressed through years, I think at this point, right, with Armis, were there additional relevant business cases? Is it core around that idea that I need to know what I have? So, is there things surrounding this that we need to look at as well that have developed along the years?
Oh, absolutely. Now that you know what kind of assets you have, what operational technologies you have, and the next problem you have is how do you prioritize what kind of assets you're going to focus on putting security products in place, processes in place, tool sets in place that you need to prioritize and focus on what to secure. So the acquisition that Armis made of CTCI helps you really focus based upon factual intelligence of what threat actors are exploiting in the wild. Once you have that type of information, you know what to actually focus on and prioritize within your environment. The next step that we took was the acquisition of Silk, which will really help you deal with the process behind the scenes of that. There's a lot of big problem statements that these three core technologies actually address. Easiest way to break it down is if you know what assets you have, you know how to protect it using factual intelligence. And with the Silk acquisition, you know how to actually prioritize that and focus on the back-end business processes that will actually reduce the scope of what you have to focus on and really go after the core problems. What this does is help you move away from a reactive security approach to a more proactive security approach to get in front of what the actual threat actors are doing before you get compromised.
Armis is excited to be a sustaining partner at Black Hat 2024. Join them at booth number 1820 to discuss the newest trends in cybersecurity with their experts and experience the power of Armis Centrix, the cyber exposure management platform. Visit www.armis.com/black-hat for more details. All right, Michael, so that tells me, let's look at the scope for a second, right? Are we talking, does this just sit, I know Armis is known as an OT company, Is this just sit in OT? Is this IT? Is this cloud? Is this everything? Kind of talk to me about the scope of the problem that you guys address.
It's not focused on any core component per se. If you take a look at my time I spent at a Fortune 100 company, I went and asked the vulnerability management team to do a scan of the environment that they knew about. And they came back to me with 78,000 assets they knew of. They scanned the environment and said there was 28 million vulnerabilities, of which 6 million were criticals and highs. And it was going to take 2 years just to address the criticals and highs. However, I used some other tool sets to actually identify that the amount of assets we actually had was almost double that. And so when you take a look at a big problem like that, you have to break it down to some core elements of it. The first problem is we didn't know what true assets we actually had from both the OT space, IT space, your IoT assets, as well as different SCADA systems that we had no idea that we actually had in place. We would know, when we see some of the information leak on the dark web, things like that. So using Centrix, we would actually be able to actually identify all the assets we had. Now, the next piece is how do you prioritize that 6 million criticals and high vulnerabilities? So what we did is took a look at some technologies I've created in the past, some of them DARPA projects, things like that, that helped us identify what vulnerabilities threat actors are using in the wild. And once we took that information, it helped us really focus on which assets we need to focus on prioritizing, not just the patching on that, but the security we need to put in place in those. Once we took that approach, that's where we took a look at the silk aspect of things and how do you manage the back-end processes of that? How do you take all those assets that you have, deduplicate that, and put that into a process that your back-end technology teams, your patch management teams, operational security teams can actually take those and make real decisions on the next steps you have to take on that piece. So that's the problem statement at large that we're actually addressing in real world that we have faced in the past.
So ultimately, it sounds to me like you define the scope by the nature of utilizing the tool. Would that be a pretty accurate assessment?
Yes, that's true.
Love it.
Yes.
Love it. Okay. All right. So let's kind of move into, I know you've alluded to it a little bit, but let's talk about solving the actual problem, right? So how, like if I'm going to think it through from a logical / I'm getting started maybe with Armis, talk me through how we start implementing that tool to solve this problem.
The first thing we want to do is stand up a couple collectors. These are passive collectors that we will take your span port, start putting information into it. We will actually take a look at the type of network traffic you have. We'll take information from your EDR tools, your XDR tools, and the various different types of security tools you have. Start feeding that into the Centrix platform. And this really helps us identify a lot of gaps that you might currently have. Say, for example, if you have 100,000 assets that you think have MDR deployed on it, but when you take a look at the information coming into the Centrix platform, you'll see you have 120 assets, of which 20,000 may not have the actual EDR tools that you might have deployed on it. You just didn't know you had those assets on there. So pulling all this information into the Centrix platform really helps you get a good sense of what actually information technologies, operational technologies, different types of technologies you may not even be aware of, from security cameras to building operation systems, things like that you have on your network, that this will actually help you identify not just what the assets are, what security tools you have around them, what kind of processes you might have around them, or the lack of.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds to me like there's a potential for that initial, let's say, scan or gathering of information that has a potential to be quite overwhelming. So how, and I hear, most likely I'm going to hear this idea around like we're going to prioritize, but can you talk me through, you've probably seen several of these, if not more, in the nature of your work. like once that first initial comes through, what does that look like? Talk me through that process. Talk me through how Armis helps you kind of cut through all that crazy amount of information.
When you have this type of information coming into it, it can be potentially overwhelming. We break it down into a lot of different processes. Some of them can be boundaries. You can say, okay, let's start with our web servers, web server farm. What is information in there we do not know that we actually had in there? So let's take that process. And we can say it could be the boundary from the technology, the operational technology. It could even be a branch office, for example, that we want to put the boundaries on that in place that we display to you. So you could take that information and say, let's prioritize this because that was the core driver of purchase of the product, for example. So however you want to focus originally as we're going through the process to identify what the key drivers are, we start to display that information to you as the boundary that's important and critical to you. And once you can start taking that information, prioritizing what you need to do on the next steps for that piece, you'll have additional information about your environment that you can take to the next steps on and hand them off to different team members or different business processes to actually run and manage those type of information you're going to need to deal with.
So my brain goes to logical boundaries that allow me to take chunks of this elephant. Is that
Absolutely.
pretty?
Yes.
Okay, love it. And so if we're solving the problem now, right? So I'm working on it now. Let's talk a little bit about the extensibility of Armis into the future. Obviously, you've made a couple of acquisitions to help, as the problem space evolves, you're making acquisitions to enhance the tool. If I'm buying this as a CISO and I say, man, I want to make sure that I'm a little bit future-proof here, what are you guys doing, or what's your approach to make sure that I have that extensibility into the future?
We're leveraging AI quite extensively now, and we have been for a while. And some of the AI components that we build, and specifically the Centrix component, with identifying assets, we're building new AI components that will help us build new collector components that will identify more accurately certain types of information technologies or operational technologies that are extremely rare. Say, for example, if you are a CISO of a water treatment plant, you have certain technologies that nobody else will actually run besides your peers. And a lot of the tool sets out there will miss some of those components on there. They might say, here's a known network card, for example, but we don't know exactly what that technology is behind the scenes. It's a problem that pretty much everybody will still run into. So we're building a specific type of AI collectors that will understand the ISO standards of the PCAPs and the different types of scanning technologies that will actually help us really identify what that piece and that technology is behind the scenes. When it comes to prioritization, specifically like your vulnerabilities, a lot of approaches we take now are like your NIST, NVD scores. If you take a look at NVD scores, NIST specifically says do not use this as a risk score. But we've been doing that for 20 plus years now. So we've evolved a little bit by bringing on EPSS algorithm that will help us identify potentially what a threat actor might do. But the problem with that is it has a dimensionality problem. If you don't have enough information about the actual vulnerability or the assets itself coming in, your algorithm might score that as an extremely low prioritization key that is not going to reflect the real world. And so with our ATI acquisition, that is really focusing on what the threat actors are actually doing in the wild. So if you have factual intelligence coming in and says threat actors are actually exploiting this type of a vulnerability right now in the wild, if you have that information, you can help you prioritize what vulnerabilities you need to really focus on in your environment. Now, future-proofing on that specific type of component is you can take a look at like your CISA Kev list, which is another component that people use to help prioritize what you need to focus on. Now, the ATI tool set actually helped identify almost 63% of the currently known CISA Kev list over a year early. And right now they're tracking, as of this date, 1,482 vulnerabilities that's actually not in the CISA Kev list. So if you could take that and have factual information saying, these are the vulnerabilities threat actors are using, and it's beating and more timely and accurate than the components or tool sets that we have now, that really helps you focus on what the threat actors are actually doing. With the Silk acquisition, the the best way to put that is when your vulnerability management team has to deal with such a large chunk of information consistently, the processes on the back end, you're going to run into a lot of problems. Deduplication is one of the biggest problems that we solve. Helping to come in and say, okay, we might have, one of our use cases is over 100,000 or 100 million vulnerabilities. And we were able to reduce that to almost 600,000 vulnerabilities that this customer had to actually truly focus on using this process. And we're invested very heavily in some of the AI components, some of the really key components that will be coming out pretty shortly, and it's quite interesting. One of the components of ATI Pro, for example, would be detection capabilities that focus on the tactics and techniques and processes that a lot of your tool sets actually miss now. So we're really focusing very heavily on the AI piece, as well as identifying what gaps we currently have in the processes and the tool sets that all of our customers have to fill those gaps in with new technologies and new AI.
Love it. Okay, so I would be remiss putting myself in with my CISO hat back on. You're talking about using AI. And so what is Armis doing to make sure that AI, are you taking information from and feeding the model from my environment? How are you making sure that AI is quote unquote safe to use?
So there's a lot of components we use, from railguards to putting your tenant information specifically only on your information only. So the AI is not like a large language model that sits behind the scenes and tries to make potential predictions and things like that. We use AI in key steps that the leverage component of it is going to be a large factor. The accuracy component is going to be a large factor. So when we build our AI models on anything, whether that's intelligence collections, building new rule sets that we need to have in place, there's very defined problem statements that we're going after and using AI specifically on those areas. So we're not going to be an AI large engine that does everything for you. It just doesn't work that way. You can, of course, do lane chain. We can chain different AI components together. Your accuracy rating is going to be much lower by doing that. So we focus what are the key components that AI would be a huge factor that humans, we just can't hire enough humans to actually fix. And so we train the models on the experts on those key areas. They only do specific areas, specific type of steps that we need using AI.
Got it. Good information. Appreciate that. Appreciate you providing that visibility. I think that's the worry, honestly, in a lot of these is it that overarching model where it's just kind of handling everything, or is it very specific use case? I'm only taking a certain very tiny amount of information and leveraging it to make things better. So truly appreciate that. Let's talk people for a second, right? So always, and kind of the next three things we're going to go across is people, process, technology. I think it's a pretty good, pretty valid way to kind of look at things when we're talking about new tooling or new products. So if I'm talking about people, do I have to go hire some experts that know Armis Centrix, or do I have some availability there where I don't have to necessarily throw a bunch of time and money at getting people on board?
You don't have to hire anybody. No. Yeah, it's the key thing, and the biggest value proposition I've seen from a people perspective, and this has been on site with a few customers recently, is it allows them to take the time that they have, focus on all the problems they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and takes, let's just say, 20% of those problems, handles it for them. So that way it frees up some of their time. And training aspect of it, you can train your current staff to use it based upon whatever that they actually need. We know CISOs who are not allowed to touch any of the security tools that they have in their environment, but they actually use Centrix to go in, look for new interesting things that's happened in the environment, and we'll actually go to their staff and say, hey, by the way, I noticed this thing changed here recently, or we're seeing this new asset popped up on the environment. Where did this come from? And it's very simple to use, very easy to use. The return on investment from the ease of use and the onboarding is extremely simple. And we're working with partner programs now, partners to actually help either manage the Centrix platform for you, or train your users to actually use it and get great value out of it very quickly, as well as reduce the time that they're going to have to spend on all the other tools and all the other issues that they have to have. We do have customers that their security operations teams spend less time in the other tools that they have, more on the Centrix platform, because they can see all of it coming together in one spot now.
If I am, again, sitting as a CISO, we have kind of traditional areas of cybersecurity programs, right? What team would be the one that you would initially say that Centrix should go into? That would be the responsible party, or used the most for that matter?
That really depends. We see sometimes it's the driver behind it would be your security operations team is going to be your biggest driver. We see sometimes the driver behind it is going to be your vulnerability management team. And we see some GDPR, not GDPR, so your compliance team would be a big driver also. So each of those groups drive the demand for it, is what we're seeing across the board.
Do you see any challenges around if we're seeing that this is a multi-team, because I've seen this in other tools as well, you kind of have this multi-team. Now we're having this fight over budget, right? Of whose budget is it going to land in? Any kind of best practices or any kind of trends you're seeing there to kind of help ameliorate that issue?
The biggest trend I'm seeing right now is the budget is starting to come more from the operational technology side, which is a kind of a surprise for the past 20, 30 years in the environments, because we're starting to see a shift now where the OT and the IT used to be completely separate in almost all companies. But we're realizing that not only is it doesn't scale and it's harder to manage, but it's nearly impossible to actually secure, because the processes, the people in place just do not correspond together very well. And we're seeing a lot of CISOs start to have to get to merge those teams and technologies and processes together. And by doing that, they realize a lot of their OT environment is extremely outdated. A lot of products are end of life. And they can get the budget to actually update those technologies, those operational technologies. And by doing that, that's where a lot of budgets I'm seeing coming to buy Centrix is coming from right now.
Got it. Good. All right, so let's talk process a little bit. So let's say I'm a buyer, right? And what can I expect coming in the door? What kind of support do I get from Armis when it comes to my people? I know, they're exposed here. Do you kind of have best practice run books? Do you got, kind of at the desk side support, or at least, on demand? What does that look like when we start coming in to engage on that initial engagement?
The initial engagement, we have a customer support team that takes over the program at that point. They work with your team, they train your team, they understand and help you set up the environment and the tool sets to actually understand, to get that information start flowing into it. Once they start getting a lot of data to really help you keep from, as we were talking about earlier, drowning in the data that's coming in, help work with your teams and say, what type of information is important to you? You talk to your vulnerability management team and say, do you want to know what your tool sets might be missing? What kind of vulnerabilities we need to prioritize? Let me set up a boundary and set up a dashboard specifically for you. If you work with the operational technology teams and they say, well, we need to know what technologies we have in place that are end of life. Okay, great. We'll set up a dashboard for you that shows you, here's the technologies that you have in place for your OT side of things. Here's 23% that are out of date. Here's another 5% that's going to be end of date by the end of this year. When you take a look at your security operations side of things, they wanted to know, hey, what tool sets are missing on our endpoints, for example. We have take a look at our platform for our MDR, and it says that we're deployed 100% on everything. So we'll set up a dashboard and say, well, actually, you're missing these 18 devices over here in this environment, or you're missing these 30. Your MDR is not deployed on these 30 different devices over in this, branch office, for example. So that's where we help really drive the value, as well as break down and keep the teams from being flooded with data that may or may not be relevant to them at that moment, or their processes that they need to actually deal with.
And so when we talk about this engagement, of course, my brain, again, back to the CISO, it's all budget, right? Is this included with the cost of the purchase, or is this something that I have to kind of professional services add on as a top layer?
That's actually a really good question. Right now, when you purchase it from us, it's something that we negotiate, put into the purchase price. We are also working with a lot of partners now that will help you put that together as a completely cost program. So whether you need to break up the budgets, so part of your budget's for buying the tool sets, part of your budget's having to be professional services. Maybe those other partners that we're working with will add additional services that might be relevant to you. Say, for example, they're experts in the MDR aspect of things, and the the Centrix platform might show you some gaps and some problems that your endpoints might actually have, and they're professionals on that space can help you deal with that too. So it depends on how you actually purchase that from us.
Got it. But it sounds to me like it's the case where, you guys will kind of do whatever what's necessary, right? What's the best fit for the
Absolutely.
customer is what it
Yes.
sounds like to me. Great.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's move into the technology aspect of things a little bit here. So, are there other technologies that are necessary? We talked about standing up a couple collectors, and I heard a span in there somewhere. So, kind of talk me through if I'm having to go as a CISO to my IT team and say, hey, I'm installing this new tool. These are the things I'm roughly. Obviously everybody's different, but these are roughly the things that we're going to need to do. Can you kind of talk me through that a little bit of what to expect if we were to start with Armis?
This is where I'm going to show a little bit of my lack of understanding this component right here, but I'll clarify as much as possible in this piece. But we have both virtual and standalone collectors that we could put on your environment. And so if you're a primarily virtual shop, it's as simple as putting on a virtual collector, start feeding your network traffic from a span port into that. Or installing a device on in your rack somewhere in your data center. Open up a span port, start putting the information into it. Now we do, as of this moment, we're a passive collection component. So your additional security tools, from your vulnerability scanning tools to your EDR tools to XDR tools, all the different security tools can feed into the Centrix platform. We have plugins for a large number of tool sets, even your code scanning tools, things like that can go to it. So you'll want to have all that information coming into the Centrix platform. We are building a collector, so can be both a hybrid as well as a passive collection components. So that is going to be a next step we're doing in the future also, because there're just going to be certain tool sets that is going to have gaps in it, unfortunately, and we need to have an additional type of a collector that will come in place in the future.
Right. And first off, I appreciate that Armis sends smart people to come talk to us. So this is not a case of me trying to get you and say, look, you don't know all the components. If somebody gets to that point, let's have a conversation with one of your SEs or something like that. We can talk through specifically around the technologies that would be necessary to deploy it. I just wanted to give people a round idea of kind of what that would look like.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about cybersecurity tools. Do you replace anything? Is there a consolidation play here? Like you bring Armis in, is there a cost savings play potentially?
We look at cost. There's definitely cost saving plays from different aspects you want to look at. There are tools that we have been replacing. There has been vulnerability management tool sets we've been replacing. There's been other tool sets when it comes to asset discovery pieces that we're replacing. With the Silk acquisition, there is a lot of tool sets when it comes to your asset management components that we're replacing also. So depending on the type of infrastructure you have, the tool sets you have in place, there is going to be a potential for replacement. But in general, the best way to look at it is it will be in a new tool set that's going to come in that you will be adding to.
Right. And what my brain says is I need to be on the lookout as we move in and do business cases to understand my current business cases, see where those overlaps may exist relative to Armis coming in the door and being able to potentially either downgrade or jettison
Correct.
those tools, those other tools with a more robust product is what it sounds like to me.
Yes, and we can help you with that process.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's good to know.
Yes.
Okay, love it. And so are there any complementary technologies, right? So is there something that you work with? Obviously, you've acquired some things, so there obviously was some to begin with, but are you seeing anything out there that you guys run in concert with that really maybe becomes a superpower as well? Or is it you guys you do so much as more of a standalone?
Yeah, I would say right now we do so much as a standalone. There's definitely some partners we're building in place that are technology driven that I unfortunately can't talk too much about at the moment, but there's definitely a lot of processes that we're taking a look at and some technologies. We say if we partner with ABC companies over here, and maybe give them some of our tool sets, some of our technologies to be embedded in their technologies, and vice versa, our customers will have a much better outcome from it. And we're looking at those. A lot of that space is going to be in your federal and the SLED type of environments that we're working on those type of partnerships with.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, one is I want to appreciate this. You coming on. This is not easy, right? This is one of those we kind of ran the full gamut here. I want to give you kind of the last minute or so. Is there anything that you want to just kind of wrap up, summarize, and or just tell the audience about Armis, about you guys as a company, as a product? The floor is yours.
Armis is really driven amongst a couple key areas that we really want to focus on is to see, manage, and protect. And we want to help you understand what you have in your environment. We want you to help you protect it better and more proactively than a reactive type of approach, and to manage those assets in a much better process than what you've done in the past. That's our key drivers right now.
Excellent. Well, Michael, I appreciate your time today. I truly, this was very insightful for me as a technologist, but also as a CISO. I'm hoping the concept of this show is that we're able to show that value to folks, that you get a deeper dive. So truly appreciate your time. And again, the intent behind the innovation series is to give folks an idea of what's coming, where the developments are in cybersecurity, and how we can get a hold of that faster, so we can understand those moves faster, how things are evolving faster. And so truly appreciate your time today. And as an end, colleagues and friends, I renew the call. It's time to professionalize the role of the CISO. With that, I wish you health, happiness, and success in your journey in becoming the professional CISO. Let's do this.
We're professionalizing the CISO role, so please subscribe to the Professional CISO Podcast.